So welcome everyone. I think this is our third class on Essential Nectar. Let's go ahead and get started with some prayers. Let me pull that up. I have to change the file in here, but just take a second. There we go. So we're going to do the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha. We'll recite this tonight. Let's just do this once. I think going forward, we'll just do this once and then the other two prayers. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. We'll do the short mandala offering. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, four continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Hidam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. And then refuge in bodhicitta, as usual, the first time in English and then twice in the Tibetan. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chenyen Gipe Sanamgi Drola Penchir Sangye Drupasho Sangye Chodang Soki Choknam La Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyabsu Chi Daki Chunyan Gipe Sonamgi Drola Penchir Sangye Druparsho. And then let's do a short meditation. Give ourselves a chance to focus the mind a bit, let go of whatever distractions we might have. And then I'll lead you in setting motivation. So just for the first few minutes, as usual, do a meditation on the breath. Try to keep the awareness with the breath. Whenever the mind wanders, then gently guide the mind back to the breath. So we'll do this for a few minutes, and then I'll lead you in setting motivation. So, to set our motivation for tonight, let's recall the teachings from last week. We were looking at the topic of devoting ourselves to a spiritual friend, making the best of that relationship. And in particular, let's recall how the best way to serve our gurus, the best way to relate to them in terms of our actions, is to practice in accord with what they teach us. And regardless of whether our gurus are actually Buddhas or not, they want us to achieve our greatest potential. They are driven by compassion for us, a wish for us to be free from suffering, a wish for us to achieve the bliss of Buddhahood. So when we cultivate the motivation of bodhicitta, this is an offering to our gurus. This is an offering to the spiritual friend, practicing exactly in accord with what the holy beings wish for us to develop ourselves to the same degree that they are, for us to be able to join their ranks and work tirelessly, effortlessly for the sake of all beings. Generating bodhicitta is one of the most positive and meritorious things we can do. So cultivate that mind now that looks upon all sentient beings through the eyes of love and compassion and wants them to attain complete happiness and complete freedom from suffering. And dedicating ourselves to attaining the state of enlightenment so we can help them to actualize those results. That is why we are here tonight. That is the purpose behind all of our study, practice, meditation, and so on, to achieve Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings. And even think that this brings a smile to our gurus, to the Buddhas, seeing us generate this mind, this strong intention, this altruistic wish. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully and we'll start the class. So again, last week we did conclude that topic of guru devotion, as it's called in our text, relating properly to a guru to make sure that we make the best use out of that relationship. So tonight I mentioned this even at the end of last week, the next topic is the other kind of preliminary topic. We have two topics that we begin with. One is the outer condition of having met with these spiritual teachers in whatever way we have it currently in our own spiritual practice. Some of us have beings that we consider gurus. Some of us are in a more indirect relationship with those beings, but we are all under the guidance of these holy beings. And then secondly, the internal causes that we've created from our own side through our own practice of virtue and so on that have led us to have this perfect human rebirth. So we're going to be looking at the qualities of this and the various topics that are generally discussed in the Lam around perfect human rebirth to gain a deeper appreciation for what it all means. Just looking over there to make sure my cat got out of the office here. Let's see, we'll start the slides from here. Again, I'll be going back to this frequently, the overall structure of the Essential Nectar, the text that we're using. We are in the basics before the 3 levels of the path. The first one being Guru devotion that we concluded, and then what's called in our text the opportune fortunate rebirth. Again, it often gets this name perfect human rebirth, but it's the same meaning. It's essentially referring to this human life that we have currently that is not just being born human, but has many other qualities to it. So we'll be looking at that again tonight. There's 3 traditional topics that are discussed in the Lam Rim text, and all 3 of these are addressed in the verses that we have in our text in this section. And The first one is recognizing this opportune, fortunate rebirth for being what it is. In other words, what makes it so fortunate? Why is it perfect? And so on. We have to gain an appreciation for that. Then to think about the great value of this opportune, fortunate rebirth. It's not just that we have this wonderful opportunity, but there's incredible value behind it that we should take advantage of then. And then finally, thinking about the rarity, the difficulty of obtaining this perfect human rebirth. So I introduced these briefly last week. I inserted another slide here that gives a recap of this whole section that we're in, the first part, verses 140 to 146. We are going to see the 8 freedoms identified somewhat specifically in that first 3 verses, 140 through 142. Then we will go on to talk about what are called the 10 endowments or richnesses. Often, this is another term that's used for them on occasion. I think Rinpoche used to like that term. There are 3 more verses that talk about those, and they sometimes are not as directly delineated in those verses, but we'll talk about them nonetheless. And then there's a concluding verse. So let me introduce you to the 8 freedoms, and then we'll see how they fit into the verses. I know many of you have studied this topic before, so I won't belabor any of this, but there are 4, the first 4, that pertain to our freedom from being born in a non-human state. And these are the 3 lower rebirths, birth as a hell being, hungry ghost, and animal. These are unfortunate states that this life we didn't end up in. Other lifetimes we have been in those realms countless times. But in this life, we are free from being under the control of our karma and projecting us into those particular unfavorable rebirths where we would experience great suffering and have great obstacles to practicing the Dharma. We'll be looking at the lower rebirths in a few classes. It's going to be a topic coming up in the small scope, the first level of the 3 for the stages of the path. Then we have the 4th one, freedom from birth as a long life God. Might take it off screen for just a moment to talk about this. The one that's quite specifically identified is a rebirth that's said to be in the 4th of the form realm, 4th realm of the form realm, where you kind of enter into this meditative state and you don't come out of it for quite some time. You have this long life as one of these form realm gods, and you don't. I think it's in the form realm. It actually could be a desire realm god, but anyway, it's a god realm, one of the god realms, a specific realm where you'd have this rebirth that you take that goes on for quite some time, and you end up kind of wasting time because you can't do anything in that meditative state that's really productive. You just sort of hang out in the bliss of all of that, which might sound good in comparison to this human life, but again, we're trying to take advantage of the time that we have, not just zone out for our own benefit. So that's the one that's usually specifically identified, but we can include pretty much all of these upper realm existences because there's always some level of distraction by virtue of the pleasures that beings experience there. In the desire realm gods, there's a lot of beautiful, wonderful things that they partake of. It's very blissful, no coarse suffering. Usually, they do have some of that occurs, but it tends to be a pretty easy life. When you get into the form realm, there's absolutely no suffering in terms of the coarser forms of suffering at all. And so those existences are pretty blissful, but again, you don't have this sort of impetus to practice the Dharma because you get sedated by those pleasures. And even in the human realm, this happens to beings, right? Where we have people who are born into wealth and never have to work their whole life. They just, you know, can be idle and doing whatever they want to, jetting from here to there, all the various places in the world, enjoying their lives. They become intoxicated with the pleasure of this life. We have our own intoxication that we might have in regard to certain pleasures, but at least for most of us, we've got some measure of not feeling totally engrossed in all those and wanting to use this life well. So that's kind of how we can see that 4th one, is even though it's not, it is said to be a quite specific rebirth. We can say any of these rebirths in these more pleasurable realms can be problematic. So we aren't in those now. The last 4 pertain to even if you get a human rebirth, you have to have some ideal conditions, and we are free from lacking those. So we are free from birth at a time when no Buddha has appeared. We're quite fortunate that we are still in the wake of the Buddha's teachings of some 2,600 years ago. Uh, we have the freedom from birth in a remote country, meaning a place where the Dharma does not exist. And we have freedom from birth with impaired faculties. We all have an ability to use our eye sense to read Dharma, our ear sense to hear Dharma teachings, our mental faculties to digest the teachings, meditate on them, work with them, and so on. So the last one, freedom from birth holding wrong views, I might mention that this might be very subjective because when we talk about wrong views, we're talking about the views that uh, deny the law of cause and effect, for example, karma, or deny the three jewels. And maybe some of us are still struggling with those teachings. Hopefully, we don't have wrong view, though, where we're negating something that the Buddha said existed. But that's where it could be very problematic, obviously. Even if you have all these other conditions, you're born in a land where Dharma exists and it's in the time of the Buddha and you have perfect faculties, but you hold these wrong views. And so you have blocks to actually utilizing this life well. So even when we look at just those eight, we see that while all human beings have the first four, right, because they're not born in any of those four non human states, whether they have the other four is really up to the individual. So not all human beings have those complete eight qualities. Let's take a look at the verses that pertain to that, and then we'll take a look at the 10 endowments. So let me put those on the screen, verses 140 through 142. It says, from the beginningless past until the present, I have been circling in the three realms of samsara. By three realms, we mean desire realm, which includes the six we normally talk about, the three upper rebirths, the three lower rebirths, and then the form realm and the formless realms, which are again subtler states of existence. So we've been circling in these, taking countless bodies as a hell being. That was one of the unfortunate ones that we're not born as now, a preta, or a beast, an animal, or a human who, again, in this case, a human who is not in the ideal situations, right? So whose suffering only sometimes paused when I found a happy rebirth. When I was able to get into a human existence or God realms or other places where I might have experienced a greater level of happiness. Even then, most of my births were in dark eons, lacking teachings. So this is again, we happen to be reborn now at a time when the Buddha's teachings did happen. We're not in a dark eon. The light of the Dharma still shines. Sometimes I roamed in border countries. That's spelling to the fact that we are now born free from that. We're not in a remote land where the Dharma doesn't exist. Sometimes I was an idiot or the like. I mean, so it's a pretty old translation. I don't know whether someone now would use idiot to translate this. It means someone, again, who's lacking complete faculties. Sometimes, again, I've been someone who holds perverse views or wrong views. And then there are additional things that are thrown in here that would also cause one to maybe not be as in tune with the Dharma. These aren't in our eight. Sometimes one whom bad friends led astray. Certain times went by with spacious doctrines, kind of following things that are not really in line with reality. Sometimes I was stultified by delusion. So it's just adding a bit more on it to say, look at how amazing it is in this rebirth that we are free from all these unfortunate conditions, the non human states, as well as certainly in this human existence. We don't have any of these faults following doctrines that would be not in line with what the Buddha taught, having bad friends who are taking us away from the Dharma and what have you. So, again, those could be included in here, but they're not technically part of the eight, but that's okay. Again, doesn't matter. We get a little more kind of uh, rejoicing of the good fortune that we have. The next set are called the 10 endowments or richnesses. This is looking at things from the positive point of view. Freedoms are things that we don't have. Here are things that we do have. The first five are personal, meaning these are things that you yourself created from your side. And the next five that we're going to see depend upon others. First one, born as a human being. Again, we all created that karma to have a human life. Whoopee. We're born in a central region. again, meaning a place where the Buddha's teachings exist. And there are places in this world where they still don't. So we can be quite delighted that we are born into a country where the Dharma wasn't here when some of us were born, but it certainly has taken off and become a major part of our landscape in terms of the place that we grew up in and live. Number three, born with complete faculties. Number four, having no extremely heavy negative karma, which is talking specifically about these 5 actions of immediate retribution. I'll talk about them in a moment. The last one is having faith in what are called the 3 baskets, meaning the 3 sort of divisions of the Buddha's teaching. So let me talk about those last 2 very briefly. There are 5 actions that are said to be incredibly powerful, these negative actions. These are identified as the 5 actions of immediate retribution because it said that if you do any of those 5 and they are not purified, when you get to the end of this life, without any intervening life, you go immediately to the worst hell realm. And we'll see that coming up when we talk about the hell realms, what's called Avicii, which is this place of unrelenting torment until the karma is exhausted for you to, be kind of out of that situation. These 5 are the first 2 are killing your father or mother of this life, meaning your biological parents. The third one would be killing an arhat, a being who has attained liberation, which we may not know. So best to kill no beings, especially human beings, but do our best to avoid those. The fourth one and the fifth one are actually said to be things that in some descriptions they say these are only things that could have been done at the time of the Buddha, but we should avoid actions that are even similar to them. The fourth one being having caused a schism in the Sangha. And this was referring to Devadatta in particular, who was the Buddha's cousin who caused a split in the Sangha. That's a powerful negative action because while this split is going on and people are infighting and what have you, there's no spiritual progress happening. It becomes an obstacle to things moving forward. And of course, it's a huge kind of action against the 3 jewels, particularly the Sangha jewel. The fifth one is drawing blood from a Buddha with ill intent, where you are maliciously drawing blood from a Buddha. And this also Devadatta did. And there is some texts say that this is only the Buddha the historical Buddha that we can be talking about, who that action of doing something that caused blood to flow from a Buddha, meaning the historical Buddha, would be this action. But again, we should do our best not to harm others. We don't know who's a Buddha, so I would avoid that, whether or not that means the historical Buddha. And the same for causing any kind of division in our spiritual communities. Sangha is usually referring to the monastic community as we use it in a conventional sense. So causing splits in the monastic community of monks or nuns would be particularly difficult for those communities to work and operate and what have you. But even causing disharmony in a community of lay practitioners is similar to that. But again, these 5 actions, hopefully we haven't done any of these. Hopefully we never killed our parents and we haven't, done any of these other actions in this lifetime. So we're free of that, or we have that opportunity of being in a life where we have not engaged in any serious negative karma. And we have faith again in the 3 baskets of the Buddha's teachings, what are often called the Tripitaka in Sanskrit, the basket of Vinaya, which is morality, the basket of Sutra, which is the concentration teachings, and the basket of Abhidharma, which is the teachings on wisdom. Then we have 5 conditions or endowments that depend upon others. We're born when a Buddha has appeared. That depends upon the karma of a world system. For a Buddha to have appeared in our world, which again happened over 2,000 years ago. Born when a Buddha has not only appeared, but taught the Dharma. And they say some Buddhas appear and they don't teach the Dharma, right? You need this supreme emanation body that turns the wheel of Dharma in a world system. Number 8, born when the Dharma teachings remain. We are still at a time when the Buddha's teachings remain. Traditionally, they say that the Buddha's teachings remain from this supreme emanation body, like Buddha Shakyamuni was, for 5,000 years. So we're about halfway through that period of the Buddha's teachings being here. Number 9, born when practitioners of the Dharma remain. So not only are the Dharma teachings there, but practitioners of the Dharma are still here. And number 10, born when there are people with loving kindness, which is specifically referring to having people who attend to and take care of the needs of serious spiritual practitioners. Again, can't say that that's an absolute because certainly in the West, monastics and nuns and monks are not taken care of to the degree that they are in the East. But generally, people have loving kindness towards beings who are devoted spiritual practitioners. And so we can be kind of rejoicing that there's not animosity towards practitioners or a neglect of them, though obviously there's always room for improvement in terms of how monastics are kind of taken care of in our world, what have you. So let's go to the verses that pertain to these 10. They're the next set of 3. So it says, "This time, through the compassion of my gurus, dwelling free of the fears of the realms of woe," meaning I've got this human body, gaining the best human body in the continent that's called Jambudvipa, which is where we are. I don't want to go too far into Buddhist cosmology, but there are said to be other human realms that are not as ideal. Meeting a good eon in an age with light, born in a land where the glorious Dharma extends, intellect not defective, senses complete, having found confidence in the 3 baskets of scriptures. And then going on, they don't have the 4th one, which was having not having done those 5 actions of immediate retribution, not having committed very negative karma, but nonetheless, this part of it isn't as delineated, all 10 of them, but they're implicit in what we're reading. Then that last line of 144, meeting a guru just like an actual Buddha, getting advice on the complete unerring path, clear understanding of what's to be done and what's not to be done, mind strongly turned towards the holy Dharma, all good conditions like food, clothes, and money complete. Again, that would be that last one of being in an age where there's loving kindness and people do uh, take care of practitioners to some degree. So again, we can see that those, not all of them are directly spelled out, but these are speaking to what we actually possess. We have this amazing endowment of this perfect human rebirth with the conditions complete. So then we have a little summary verse for this. I have now found the excellent human body, which because of these points is complete in the 18 factors of opportunity and good fortune. This is through gathering an ocean of previous virtue. We're going to see this shortly in terms of the way in which this human rebirth came about, because we're going to talk about its rarity, that third part of this section, and specifically its rarity in terms of causes. You have to have all the causes complete to not just get a human rebirth, but to get an ideal human rebirth like this one, a perfect human rebirth. As we go through all this and we sort of this first topic of recognizing these incredible qualities, this is a topic that should uplift us a lot because we look at what we possess, because sometimes we can be kind of depressed and kind of down on life and down on ourselves, but we are endowed with incredible opportunity right now. And we should feel so blessed that we have this. And of course, take advantage of it. That's where we're going to with all of this. It's not just to sit there and be happy and take advantage of the joys of having this human life, but rather to see that there's kind of responsibility with having attained this, especially when we consider that we created the causes for this in our prior lives. You are the creator of this. I mean, certainly there were external conditions, right? Like a Buddha appearing and da 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 da. But you created the karma to be born human at a time when this is going on. I love Geshe Sherab. Sometimes we talk about this being sort of a degenerate age, and that may even depress us when we hear that term, like, oh God, we have this horrible, horrible time of the existence of this world that we're born into and what have you. First of all, this whole idea of a degenerate age is more about eons of time. It's not just this little like 21st century or 20th century or something. But nonetheless, Geshe Sherab, he said, we should actually be really like just amazed at the good fortune of living in the time that we do when the Buddha's teachings are more available than they ever have been in this world, right? If you look at just the history 25, 2600 years ago, when it was pretty much on the Indian subcontinent that we had the teachings of the Buddha, and then they gradually got dispersed into other parts of Asia. They didn't even make it across the ocean to the United States until much later, right? I don't know when Zen came to the US, but it hasn't been that long. I would bet that the Dharma hasn't been around in terms of the West more than a century. And now we live in a time when so many of the Buddha's teachings and teachings from the Tibetan tradition and Chinese tradition and the Theravadan tradition and so on have been translated into English. The Pali Canon, most of it's been translated into English. So many of the Sanskrit sutras, all the great treatises from India. We have the Dharma at our fingertips. This phrase of liberation in the palm of your hand, I mean, it's never been truer in many ways. The teachings are all there for us to partake of. So when we look at these topics, it's important to think even in terms of the very specific time that we live in, even though that's not mentioned uniquely in the text, but to really recognize that this is quite astounding, that we are in this, kind of place of amazing good fortune, right? That, we just should be delighted every day just getting up with this, smile on our face. Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one time when he was teaching on this topic of perfect human rebirth, he had been watching. I guess they had showed him the TV with the World Cup on, with what the rest of the world calls football, but we call it soccer. But he said that when these guys, when they make a goal, they're like this, like all jumping up and down and all excited. He says we should be like that every day with regard to our perfect human rebirth. So this first topic is really just to kind of show you that you do have amazing, amazing, good karma, that you've created this and you have this incredible opportunity with this human life. The second topic that we go on to is to talk about the value of this life in terms of what we can do with it, how it has meaning, and then again talk about the rarity. I did notice that somebody posted something about the Zen and the beats, in the early 1950s. Yeah, I'm certainly, it hasn't been around. That's what 70 some years. I don't think that there was much Buddhism in the country before then. I know there were folks like Evan Wentz, who I don't know when he lived, and some of the translations that were done of the sutras, maybe into English language, but some of those I think even came out of England as opposed to, our side of the pond. So again, we should feel incredible good fortune. Let's take a look at this next topic, thinking about the great value of the opportune, fortunate rebirth. And this is going to have a little introductory verse, 147. Most of these do. And then we're going to have the three values kind of laid out. The third one isn't as, again, directly announced, but I kind of find it implicit in those last several verses. The first one is what we call the temporary value of attaining high status. I think I mentioned earlier in this course that we have these two main goals that the Buddha taught: high status and what's called definite goodness. High status means that we have the ability to attain good rebirths. This is what we can do with this life. This is the first level of the stages of the path, is to actually direct your mind towards achieving the results of good rebirths in the future. Because most of us will need to continue our spiritual development over a continuity of good rebirths. That's the first goal that the Buddha taught. It's not an ultimate goal because we can fall from that state. If we don't attend to it each lifetime, you could fall, to attaining a lower rebirth, and then you wouldn't have that goal accomplished at all. The ultimate value is attaining the goals of definite goodness, which are liberation and enlightenment. Again, why they're called definite goodness is that they are certain to continue. When you attain the state of liberation, which by that term we mean your own individual freedom from samsara, or enlightenment, which is the goal that we are always directing our minds towards through bodhicitta, both of those goals are irreversible. It's not like we will attain this perfect idyllic state and then fall from grace and have to go through it all over again. They are certain to continue. That's the final result that we can achieve, enlightenment, but though even the goal of liberation is unchanging in terms of never degenerating. You go from there to continue on the path to enlightenment eventually. But nonetheless, those are not things you deteriorate from. So those are the more lasting goals that the Buddha taught. Having considered those two goals, well, then the third one, the value moment by moment, this momentary value, is kind of implicit in there. Because we can attain these goals with this life, every moment of this precious life has value. What we are doing at this very moment, turning our minds towards the Dharma, this is showing the momentary value of this life, that in each moment we can create the causes for the other two goals, the goal of high status, the goal of definite goodness. So this is what we're looking at, kind of trying to steer our minds in that direction, but seeing that this is the great meaning and value of this life. Again, this is how they're often laid out in the Lam Rim, quite specifically, Pabanka Rinpoche's Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand. I have seen some presentations where they say you have the three values of high status, liberation, and enlightenment, kind of taking what I lumped together into number two and splitting it out into two and not talking about the momentary value. But I like this idea of momentary value. Kind of points out to us that every moment of our day can be rich in terms of how much merit we can create, how much virtue we can practice, how much we can turn away from our deluded states of mind and what have you. Incredible opportunity in every single second of this life. Okay, so let's take a look then at Essential Nectar, this next section, thinking about the great value of the opportune, fortunate rebirth. Again, verse 147 introduces this topic. It says, "This body, the complete, opportune, fortunate basis, is of immense value, in no way to be conveyed, even by such an example as finding a system of realms thrice thousandfold, of all full of precious jewels." So it's kind of pointing out an example that gets us into thinking about the value of this life being extreme. If you were to take what's called here a trichologism, I think that's the word for it, a 3,000-fold world system that's completely full of precious jewels. Now, something like this in our world would be like outrageous wealth, right? And you might think, oh, that's incredibly valuable to have all of those jewels, these world systems completely filled with jewels. Can't even get our heads around what that would look like. A human life like the one we have is more valuable than that. So again, why is it more valuable? That's what we're going to look at in terms of these three next parts, where we look at the reason why it's valuable in terms of temporal results we can get, and then the more ultimate results. And then again, that leads to the conclusion that we have that value minute by minute. So that's these next three verses. Temporally, whatever I want of the wealth and plenitude of the high states of gods and humans, with this excellent basis, I can attain it just as I wish without any trouble or hardship. And it doesn't really take that much difficulty to get a good rebirth and to have a good state of existence in our next life. We're going to see the causes again shortly, and they're not horribly complicated. They just have to be tended to. With this basis, verse 149, I can easily gain, if I wish, not merely high samsaric estate, but also a karmic fruition with 8 virtues, fit as foundation for achieving the glorious level of definite goodness. So let's leave this for just a second to talk about these 8 virtues. Some of you might recall these from when you attended Exploring Buddhism with me, when we went through the topic of exploring the path. In that, I presented to you what are called often the 8 ripened qualities. See, this is the idea that getting a good rebirth as a human is one thing. Having all the specific qualities that fill out that existence is a whole nother karma that we should attend to, that we can do in this life. And let me just share those real quickly on the slide, and then I'll point out to you a handout that I'll have Colleen send out to you that actually comes from the Exploring the Path course. So many of you have probably seen it before. The first of these is having a long life so that you have the ability to use a greater duration of time to practice the Dharma, that you have beauty, attractiveness, because it is good to be attractive to others so that they are attracted to you and can become kind of your disciples, those who have a closeness to you and follow you and want to learn from you. High status so that we are not in a lower position where we are looked down upon. Wealth so that we can use that wealth to benefit others. Influential speech so that people listen to what we say and helps them to have their um, issues dealt with because we can point out clearly what they need to work on, what obstacles they need to remove. Power and fame, not because we want to have, fame and be well known in the world, but because others will easily, follow our advice and instructions. They'll actually go along with what we say because of the position of power that we have. The seventh, freedom and independence. I pointed this out to everyone when we did the exploring the path course. This is often stated in the more traditional texts, like Pavanka Rinpoche's text, as being born as a man. It's better to see it through the lens of freedom and independence. We are in a patriarchal world, generally. Very few matriarchies. Men tend to have more freedom and independence. And so being born as a man in many cultures is in a better situation than being born as a woman. And this still holds true in many cultures today. So the concept behind saying that to be reborn as a man is to be born with freedom and independence, so that we actually can do what we need to do and not be interfered with in regard to achieving our spiritual goals. And again, the patriarchy still exists in so many cultures, even in Tibetan Buddhism still. Although there now are full monastic studies for both monks and nuns, this is a recent addition to uh, the traditional ways that things were done. So that's something we should ideally want to create the cause for as well. And then eighth, having a strong mind and body, having the ability to undergo hardships, to endure whatever it is we need to do on our spiritual path. Makes sense. All of these, again, are very useful for us in a human life, and not something we get just for the sake of enjoying them, but for the sake of using them for the benefit of others. So I'm going to point out to you this handout that, again, I'll send on to Colleen after class tonight. You might recall this looking at it, that I put on there the function or the benefit of each of those, saying that, what it gives you, great influence, attracting others, so on. And then the causes for achieving that, so that you have some understanding of what you need to do in this human life in order to have those in your next human existence. Because again, it's not, just a few causes we need to create. It's many causes that will round out that existence and give us all the ideal conditions. Again, these were called here a karmic fruition with 8 virtues that is fit as a foundation for achieving the glorious level of definite goodness. Again, those more lasting states of well-being that we can accomplish with the human existence that's complete in all these ways. Then 150, a final one in this section on the temporal value. Whichever totally pure land I may wish to go to, beyond the impure states of world and being, such as the realm of Tushita, wide and blissful, with this basis, I am able to do so. Excuse me. So the idea there is, we don't talk a lot about the pure lands in Tibetan Buddhism, though there is some mention of them. And I think Rinpoche, even in some of his teachings, would emphasize Amitabha's pure land in particular, which is said to be a realm that beings can go to without any great prerequisites, in a sense. You do have to kind of create the karma to be reborn there, but it's not a state of existence that, like these kind of pure realms of the Sambhogakaya aspects of the Buddhas and so on, that you have to be an Arya being to get there. You have to have this direct insight into emptiness and what have you. Instead, ordinary beings like all of us, can take rebirth in Amitabha's Pure Land, said to be relatively easy to get in. This is just pointing out that with this life, you can also get that type of a temporal result, which is rebirth in a Pure Land where you can practice the Dharma. And it's said that even in Amitabha's Pure Land, you can attain Buddhahood there. However, I have read, of course, in Pavanka Rinpoche's text, he talks a little bit about the Pure Lands, and he says that there are many bodhisattvas born in the Pure Lands that are praying to be reborn as a human because of the ideal conditions of this human life. We're going to see those coming up in terms of the ultimate values we can attain, because specifically with this human life, we can practice Tantra and attain enlightenment very, very quickly, for the benefit of all beings, driven by that unbearable compassion that wants to become a Buddha as quickly as possible for their sake. So, um, so let's go on then to this next section, which has to do with that ultimate value. Again, 2 levels of the ultimate value: liberation and then enlightenment. Verse 151, this is not all. Should I wish to find even the bliss of liberation, every samsaric suffering, birth, aging, sickness, death, and the rest, appeased forever, with this excellent basis, I can achieve it. Again, speaking to that ultimate result being able to be attained. Then going on to talk about enlightenment in 152 and 153. Even the state of the perfect, spontaneous three kayas. We did talk about these kayas, these bodies of a Buddha last week. This is where we present three, the Dharma kaya, and then the two form bodies, the Sambhoga kaya and the Nirmana kaya. Complete in every good quality, pure of all faults, the two obscurations, including their imprints. These are, again, the two things that keep us from attaining Buddhahood, the afflictive obscurations that also are abandoned by those attaining liberation, and the knowledge obscurations that are only abandoned by those on the Mahayana path. So I can achieve with this basis, if I practice, that state of complete purity, that state of full development, the perfect Buddhahood. In particular, with regard to the ultimate result of enlightenment, with this basis composed of the six elements, if I rely on highest yoga tantra, the highest level of tantric practice, I can attain that very stage of unity of the two supreme bodies in this short life. The two bodies of Dharmakaya and Rupakaya, which in Tantra are represented by the clear light mind and the illusory body. We can attain that complete union in this short life. So in this section, our author Yeshe Sundar, he's pointing out that we have the ability to attain not just temporal results, but the ultimate results of liberation and enlightenment, or at least create the causes to begin that process. To take tantric initiation, to begin to practice tantra through the generation and completion stages and what have you. Tantra is going to be nailed on the very end of this text, which is 2 verses. Tantra is usually just alluded to as kind of something you advance to after the Lamrim. It's not technically a Lamrim topic because Lamrim is a sutra presentation of all the teachings we need to practice sutra well, or to practice tantra well. And so the sutra teachings just go up to that level, and usually tantra is just mentioned as an afterword. And then once you have, developed a good understanding of the sutra path, then you can go on to practice tantra. But even as we are developing our understanding of the sutra path, we should be kind of eager to engage in tantric practice. So I'm just letting you kind of doing a little advertisement for tantric practices. They're more difficult. There's more involved in them, certainly. But I think it's important that people do take advantage when these things are offered. We're at an age now in, when I first started practicing the Dharma in San Francisco, it seems like there were lamas coming through every month or something to do tantric initiations. And now it's getting to be quite rare. But just so you know that is something that we should kind of think about in this human life based on the elements of this body and the ability to utilize meditations that help you to activate very subtle energies in the body. You can attain enlightenment very quickly. Okay. Let's go on to the third section, which again, I was saying that this is value in every moment. It's not as clearly delineated as that, but if you read it, which we'll do, you can see that a lot of this is pointing to the fact that there is great value all the time in this life. Every moment of her existence is imbued with that potential. Since this excellent, opportune, fortunate basis, because of these points, has very great value, whether one looks at its temporal or at its ultimate value, therefore the gurus have said it excels a wish-granting jewel. This mythical wish-granting jewel can only grant wishes pertaining to, getting something nice in this world. This is beyond that. This is giving us our wishes granted to a greater degree. Verse 155, in this case, having met with such a basis, to be attached to fruitless work for this life, and not to practice the path for higher rebirth or freedom, is, if I think well about it, truly crazy. We're kind of crazy if we don't use every minute of this life, or at least as much as we can of this life, to plant the seeds for these temporal and ultimate results. This is what we're here for. And we would, as it's going to be pointed out, we would be wasting this life if we didn't do that. And that's what's pointed out in 156. It says, if now allowed to accomplish the twofold benefit, meaning again, high status and definite goodness, or whatever I wish, whatever, results in between those that I would want. If I do not very quickly practice, then I'm like a person who reaches the land of jewels, but does not take any wish granting gems, with them. This is the analogy that's often used. I mean, that first one we started about saying that that this, perfect human life is worth more than all of these world systems filled with jewels. But here the idea is if you were to go on some journey to some mythical, you know, island of jewels where like there's jewels growing on trees and you could take them all with you and you went home empty handed, that would be ridiculous, right? I mean, let's even just use kind of a more mundane example. If you were to go to Paris, for example, and you just went to Paris and you just sat in your hotel room for the duration of your stay and you didn't go to the Louvre and you didn't go to, all the various other museums and you didn't go out and see what the, life is like in the streets of Paris and go to the cafes and the restaurants and whatever else you want, the Eiffel Tower and whatever. If you came home from this, like, 2 weeks in Paris and they said, well, how was your time? And you said, well, the hotel was really nice. I stayed there. People would look at you and say, well, you didn't take advantage of being in Paris for 2 weeks to do all these amazing things. And we wouldn't do that probably, right? I mean, any of us, if we got the opportunity to go to some wonderful city that we'd never been to before, we would take advantage of our time there. And again, that's in a mundane way and really not a full use of this life. But if we're here in this perfect human life and we walk away from this life empty handed, what good will it have done? We created all these causes of the past. They've ripened into this existence right now, and then it's going to be over. That's the next topic we go to. It's death and impermanence. This life will end. This doesn't go on forever. Your stay in Paris is limited. You can't stay there for the, eternity. Your stay in, this human existence is limited. So do what you're here for. Take advantage of this life as best as you can. It's again the message that we're getting from each of these sections. This one in particular, pointing out how we have to use this life well, every minute of it. So verse 157 kind of rounds out those other verses saying, now casting actions for this life, attachments to this life, and so on, merely for the pleasures of this life, casting them far away. Let me train my mind, regardless of day and night, in the stages of the path to the goal, enlightenment, and make worthwhile my winning this opportune rebirth. We have won it in a sense. Rinpoche's thing of like, the goal, having just accomplished a single goal in a football game. These guys are like this, just they think that they've really won something very important. But what they have in a human existence is more important than that, more important than any of the mundane things that we could invest our time in. There is one topic that isn't talked about in our text by Yeshe Sundru that sometimes is mentioned here, but also can be mentioned in terms of death and impermanence, and that's the 8 worldly dharmas that most of us can get quite preoccupied with. That's how we waste this life, by being concerned about first the pair of trying to gain things materially and not lose them. We have great attachment to this whole, thing around things and materiality, gain and loss. The second pair are those pertaining to comfort and discomfort. We get preoccupied with trying to make our lives as comfortable as possible. And you can become obsessed about it, right? You know, and avoiding any discomfort. This is how most beings are spending their time. The third pair have to do with praise and criticism, right? We hunger after people telling us good things about ourselves, and we don't want to ever hear anything negative. And then the fourth pair have to do with having a good reputation in this world, people thinking well of us, and so on. They used to call it fame, but again, I don't think most of us really crave fame in the way that we talk about it in our culture. But we like a good rep, right? We like people to think well of us, and we avoid any ill repute. We do everything we can to make sure that people don't talk bad about us and get a bad reputation. Most of these are a waste, all of these are a waste of life. Whether you have these things in your life or not isn't a problem. It's your attachment to wanting to get those four and avoid the other four, trying to make sure that this is how you dedicate your time. I want to be as comfortable as possible. I don't want to ever experience discomfort. Well, Again, that's just going to be impossible in this life to even accomplish, but it's a waste of time thereby. And it only kind of heightens our attachment, makes us even more addicted to samsara. We should be seeing samsara for what it is and wanting to turn away from it. We'll get to that much later in our text. But even at this level, we should see that this is not a good use of this life. This is the same use of this life as animals in some regard, at least the first few, wanting to acquire enough stuff and comfort and whatever to make sure that they live a good life, avoid any of the difficulties, pains, and what have you. Uh, these things are going to happen. We just have to have a different mindset about them, not go crazy about them, and really just recognize them for what they are. And if we can use them well, if you do have material gain in your life, use it well. Don't use it as a source of creating greater attachment. Anyway, that's just a little aside in this section about using this life, every minute of this life, for the greatest possible value. Hard to do it 24/7, but nonetheless, this is what we want to be conscious of every day, is to what degree am I dedicating myself to achieving these goals, these values of this life? Or am I just using this life kind of meaninglessly? And for having created all the causes through our past lives to do that would be such a waste, as was said here, that returning home empty handed after having gone to this place of great riches. Number three, the third topic and final topic on this perfect human rebirth is thinking about how rare it is, how difficult it is for us to get this. And that's where we might think, oh, we have it, but we can get it again, no problem. Well, you can, but you do have to create the causes. So we're going to see an introductory verse on this. There's quite a few verses in this section, but we have three ways traditionally that we talk about it in terms of its rarity. The first one is it being rare by way of causes, meaning that you do have to actually meticulously and strongly create the causes to get this good rebirth, and not just a human life, but a human life with all the perfect qualities. Then B, rare by way of numbers or results, meaning like if we look at the number of beings that attain this particular result, it's quite small compared to those that don't. And letter C, rare by way of examples, meaning that there are certain examples the Buddha gave. You might all recall the one of the blind turtle that comes up to the surface of the ocean. We'll see that in our text, and I'll talk about it more there. There's just two verses for that. And then there's some concluding advice, a number of verses about kind of how to take that understanding of the rarity of this life and make sure that you kind of run with that, that you actually do take advantage of this human life to make sure that your next rebirth is as good as this one or even better than this one. We may look at our lives and feel like we might be deficient in certain things, especially if you look at that list of 8 ripened qualities. But we can create the causes for that for our next life. All we have to do is put our attention to it. So let's go to the text. I notice my camera is getting a little blurry here. I'm not sure why that is. I'm going to try to turn it off and turn it back on. Let's go to the next section. Again, we have an introductory verse, this first verse, 158. Although I have come to acquire such a basis, it's like Threadball the cripple. I prefer the word disabled. Cripple is such a, again, antiquated word and kind of cruel. Threadball, this person who was disabled, once riding upon a wild donkey. Apart from just this single present occasion, I shall not find it repeated again in the future. So what's this story of Threadball? I mean, you may have heard this if you've read your Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, but I'm going to read from the text that is the commentary that goes with this. This is the older version of Essential Nectar. It's been, again, republished. It was on your book list that I provided you with. And this is at the bottom of page 73. He says, to illustrate the rarity, the Kadampa Geshes frequently quoted this story about a man who was disabled in both legs, who fell from the upper story of a house and landed on the back of a wild donkey who happened to be underneath. The donkey bolted with the man hanging on for dear life. When they eventually came to a settlement, a spectator observed that the man was singing and asked him why. And the disabled man replied that it was the first time he had ever ridden on the back of a wild donkey, and there was no chance of its happening again. When could he sing for joy, if not now? So it's kind of like, you get your one chance to ride this wild donkey. And so, you're going to take it for everything it's worth and enjoy the hell out of it. So then Geshe Rabton goes on in the next paragraph. Clearly, it is very unlikely that a disabled person would not only fall on the back of a wild ass, but manage to stay on. Our falling into this special human situation is similarly unlikely. What else should we do but take this unique opportunity to practice Dharma to the best of our ability? So that's the idea behind that little story, introducing this topic. So again, we're going to go to the first of the three sections where we see how rare it is in terms of causes, the causes that we have to create to get an existence like this. So this is 159, just to gain in general upper realm rebirth, meaning a human demigod or god, one has to collect its various virtuous causes. Since it is hard to generate virtuous attitude, gaining an upper realm rebirth is also hard. We have to first practice morality, practice good actions, good deeds. We have to actually, not engage in negative actions that would propel us into an unfortunate rebirth. Continuing in 160, it says, to gain the opportune fortunate birth in particular, each factor's cause of the 18 that we went through earlier tonight must be achieved. Since achieving the causes like this is exceedingly rare, how could the fruit, complete opportune birth, not be rare? So again, when we look at the specific causes, it's often delineated that morality is the main one, but the other two causes that we often hear in this regard are to practice things like generosity as well as patience, many of the other qualities that are imbued in the six perfections, because these do ripen into good situations. And we looked at that list earlier. I didn't point out all the individual causes of the eight ripened qualities, but a lot of those are ideal to have in a human rebirth, right? Generosity is the means of having wealth. If we aren't generous in the life that we have now, we're like depleting our future resources. We're just going to use the resources we've created from our past karma in this life solely for our worldly benefit and not use them well by giving them away to others so that we can create the causes for future wealth and resources. That's how the karma works. And patience is said to be what gives you a beautiful form. That the kind of the discipline of practicing patience actually creates the karmic results of you having a pleasing form. If you look at what anger does to faces, it's not very pretty, right? If you see people with angry faces yelling and what have you, that can be indicative of the type of karma you're creating, to kind of be reborn unattractive and ugly by not having the patience to be able to endure things. When we have a patient face, it's calm and what have you. Anyway, each of these individual causes fill out this human existence. The main cause, practicing morality, particularly the 10 virtues, which we will see later. Secondly, engaging in acts like generosity, patience, and so on. But the third one that's often delineated is to actually create what we call pure prayers, stainless prayers, prayers that are not about, oh, may I get another life like this one so I can even enjoy life more, and have lots of opportunity to see the world and do all sorts of fun things. You make a pure prayer that is free of those worldly dharmas, free of those worldly concerns, where we are intent upon achieving a good existence that we can use for spiritual practice, not just for the fun of having a good human life. Hopefully, as we go through all these other meditations and we learn about developing renunciation and all these other important states of mind to cultivate, we start seeing that this is not something that we should be kind of creating like an ideal picture of, oh, I just want to get a good human existence because that's the be all and end all of everything. Yeah, and it isn't. This human existence is faulty as well. But we need a good human existence in order to practice the Dharma. Because you look at the other realms, the opportunity isn't as great. This human life is rich with opportunity, as we've already seen. So again, the three causes aren't as clearly delineated there in our text, but nonetheless, they are part of this whole first section. So let's carry on with that, because we get a little warning from Yeshe Sundar in regard to if we think that we've created these causes already, right? Oh, well, I've done my share of work to create the causes for a good rebirth. Well, think again. He says, if by a fluke I've already achieved all the causes of gaining the opportune birth without any missing. My mind still contains very many conditions destructive of them, such as anger, wrong views, and abandoning Dharma. These three are being set out. The first two are the ones that generally we talk about that can destroy or weaken our positive karma. Moments of anger, especially if we have anger at the time of death, or any cultivation of wrong views that undermines what we've done in creating all this good karma. We have those in our mind too. We have the conditions for those things to arise. Don't think that we're kind of free of all of that and that our karma is guaranteed to ripen. That's a whole nother thing. We have to get this karma to ripen at the end of this life to bring us to that good rebirth that we are ideally trying to attain. So, verse 162, even if such conditions don't destroy them, anger, wrong views, and so on, since my defiled mind and incorrect conduct are strong, while positive mind and desirable conduct are weak, don't I know which result is going to ripen first? Or I would say, do I know which result is going to ripen first? Oh, that's kind of a weird phrasing in it there, but the idea is that we have a preponderance of negativity in our minds. I mean, just look at our crazy minds. I'll use mine as an example. I'm not going to reveal my whole mind to you, but throughout the day, there's that tendency of gravitating towards things that are mostly about attachment, mostly about the worldly dharmas. I try to avoid them, try to not spend as much time with them, but there's still, a great amount of that time that can be wasted. And to make virtue, to actually engage in study, practice of Dharma, meditation, what have you, takes great effort. It's very easy to go to the dark side, right? And very difficult to go to the light side. So we just have to be aware that this is the state of our minds. So don't think, oh, well, I did these certain actions or, da 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 da, and I'm set. I don't have to worry about it. As I said, one of the most important things we have to be attentive to is that when we die, it said that the particular karma that ripens at that point that will propel you into your next existence is certainly a product of what you've created, and especially stronger karmas that you've created in this life. But it can be influenced by your state of mind at death. If you haven't trained your mind well enough and really kind of reduced so much of your anger so that you're assured that you're going to die with a very positive state of mind, well, good luck. And we don't know how we're going to die, right? Someone could come up to us and be very violent and take our life, and we might die with moments of anger. We might die with a lot of very horrible thoughts at the person who's perpetrating this act on us, right? So we have to be careful. We have to create a preponderance of virtue as opposed to non-virtue, and try to assure that when we get to the end of this life, that we've done what we needed to do, and we can have that, what I like to call future life insurance, to be sure that we're going to get a good existence that will help us to carry on our spiritual practice. So he's just pointing out that don't think, we can rest on our laurels. There's a lot of things that can actually impact this. So then the last verse in this section, our Lord, the Conqueror's doctrine appears in the world only from time to time, like a star in the daytime. Very rare to see a star in the daytime. It does happen sometimes in the beginning of the day, but in the middle of the day, very unlikely. If we reflect on this point too, to gain the excellent, opportune, fortunate births, very rare. So again, when we talk about creating all the causes for it, well, we have to get that good rebirth at a time when the Buddha's teachings are still in our world, right? When they've appeared. So it is, again, very rare in terms of the causes and the kind of creating the ideal conditions for that to occur. Now we go into the thing about the numbers, showing how the result is actually quite rare to achieve. That effect is difficult when we look at the number of beings who aren't attaining that. So in verse 164, did not the infallible truth-telling master, meaning the Buddha, um, say that the beings of lower realms are as the dust on the earth, while the beings above in the upper realms who've gone to happy migrations are as the dust particles on a fingernail? There's different ways that this is kind of set out. Sometimes they say that, when you talk about all the dust that that are the beings in the lower realms, when the Buddha took his fingernail and kind of took a little bit of that dust, he said that those are the number of beings from the lower realms that are going to take rebirth in an upper existence. And that's already like just getting an upper rebirth. When you look at the vast number of beings that are in these unfortunate states, when you study the Abhidharma Kosha and go through Buddhist cosmology, they say that the largest portion of beings are in the lower realms. The beings, as you go up, become lesser, and in some of the God and certainly the form and formless realm gods, that there's very few beings that are born in there because it takes an incredible amount of virtue to actually attain those results. Whereas it's very easy to slide down the slope again into the lower rebirths. We're going to see again those rebirths being presented in the small scope of it. But this is, again, just pure numbers. When we look at it, not to say that we still can't end up in the fortunate ones who will actually get a good rebirth, but um, you know, it's very difficult. This isn't an easy task. 165. The Buddha taught that, compared with the limitless number of beings in hell, in preta, and in animal destinies, those reborn in good destinies, with the bodies of gods or humans, are counted in ones and twos, whereas there's these limitless numbers in the lower realms, just what I was saying. How many befuddled animal sentient beings are in the ground, in the space taken up by a tent? And again, how many people in a city, even in large ones, only a few 100,000. Of course, this was, from a perspective of an 18th century Tibetan, and living in Tibet. We have big cities now with millions of people, right? But nonetheless, when you compare the amount of human beings to the amount of just animals in this world, there's obviously so many more animals. I remember, I think it was Rinpoche who said that the beings that exist in the oceans are even greater, than what we would think of on the land or what have you. That there are so many beings in these spaces and in the water. And of course, the larger portion of this planet is the oceans, the water. And beings live in these dark, deep places that we can't even see. But, this is huge amounts of beings. But I often even think about here in New Mexico, I imagine it's kind of the same in Missoula. In the summer in particular, you see so many ants coming up to do all of their yearly thing, right? To get food, forage, whatever. And in a single space like this, where it's like myself and my partner Patrick and our two cats, there can be zillions of ants living, right? They even come into the house frequently, right? If we leave food out and they manage to find it and what have you. So we know that even in just this little plot of land, similar to what was said in our text, where there's just a tent, just an abode, you can have zillions of these creatures, while only a handful of human beings live in that space, right? So that's showing that the human beings are much less numbers, even in this world, compared to the animals. And when we get into microorganisms and all this, well, then you're talking a whole nother level of stuff, right? All these beings that, as Venerable Robina says, if you kind of put a microscope under your armpit, it's a zoo under there, is what she often says, right? And we don't see all of those creatures that are sentient beings that are also a part of this world. And that's just this world. We haven't even talked about the pretas and the hell beings and all these other states of existence. So again, numbers are not in our favor, folks. It's not like we, have tons and tons of these beings out there in the human world. We might think it's a lot with the almost 8 billion that exists in this world, but it's really quite small. Among human beings, so now that's considered, all the other sentient beings now, but even among human beings, the 8 billion almost in this world, consider the few who have entered the door of the Dharma, the multitude who have not. Even among those who boast of practicing Dharma, are there many or few with the perfect opportune birth? Right? Some people may say they practice Dharma, but have they really, obtained all the conditions that lead them to practice that well, and what have you? Those who aspire to the Dharma are already very, very rare. Thinking about these points, the conqueror taught with many examples to make the meaning plain, such as the turtle putting its neck through the central hole in a yolk, which is drifting all over the ocean. So now we have actually entered into, the third part of this, where we are talking about by way of examples, analogies that show how rare it is. Again, these are maybe not to be taken completely literally, but they're meant to be pointing out to us how difficult it is to get this rebirth. This turtle putting its neck through the central hole in a yolk that's drifting all over the ocean. Most of you know this analogy. It's not just a turtle, it's a blind turtle, okay? And if you imagine this world completely covered in water, so it's all ocean, there's a blind turtle that lives at the bottom of the ocean, and only every 100 years does the turtle come up to the surface. In the meantime, there is a golden yolk, with the hole in it that is floating on the surface of the ocean, a single golden yolk. And for the turtle to put its neck through that golden yolk upon coming out every 100 years, and it's blind, so it can't see where the yolk is and try to, move over a little to get it if it's even in the vicinity. Again, this starts sounding pretty ridiculous in terms of it must be almost impossible to get a good human rebirth. Perfect human rebirth is quite rare. So we should take that in the light of this and not, think it's too literal, but nonetheless, it is quite rare using that example. A pea attaching itself to the side of a glass house. If you threw a round pea at a glass house, maybe if you threw it really hard, it would smash against it. But, peas roll. They don't stay on the side of a glass house. A star being seen at midday in a blue sky. We talked about that. And mustard seed staying on the point of a needle. How rare is this body, the opportune, fortunate basis? Again, so the Buddha talked in this way about these various examples. So now we come to the conclusion of all of this. Thus, by way of cause, effect in terms of numbers, how many have that effect or result compared to others that don't have it, and examples, the excellent basis is very hard to find. Can I afford to wait and not grasp the essential value in this which is obtained only once? We often use that phrase only once. We don't mean that you've never had this rebirth with all the perfect conditions. It means that it is that rare that it's almost as if you found it only once. And we can't be assured of getting it that quickly again, right? Because of all of the things we're reading in this section. So at this time, when I found the opportune, fortunate basis, thoroughly free from the 8 states of no opportunity, letting appearance distract me, I don't reach the essence, but start to return to the realms of woe again. This is like returning to one's own country empty-handed from the land of jewels. Where is there an action more diluted? What severer loss could there possibly be? How could I lose anything more than losing this perfect human rebirth, not using it well? In general, gaining the opportune birth is thus rare. In particular, meeting a Manjunath's teachings is rare, meaning these kind of glorified gurus. Specifically, we saw that earlier, it was kind of primarily referring to Tsongkhapa. We are living in the wake of Lama Tsongkhapa's teachings on the Lam Rim and what the Buddha taught, which is quite rare to have someone of unexcelled scholarship and precision give us these teachings. So Tsongkhapa, is one of those great gurus who we can follow. And then it says a fully qualified guru as refuge is rare. We talked about this even when we talked about how hard it is to get a guru in our day and age now, right? The Dharma, complete and unerring, both is rare. To have inner analytical wisdom is rare. A mind that is fit to be used in the Dharma is rare. Friends who are striving for liberation are rare. The conditions, subsistence consistent with Dharma are rare. At this time when so many rare things have come together, if I don't abandon all thoughts and all actions of this life and practice the path for high rebirth and definite goodness, then nothing could be more regrettable. It's worse than going to an island of jewels and coming home empty handed because we could get something so much more valuable than all those jewels. So now, without falling under the power of distraction, for the sake of helping mother sentient beings who time and again have cared for me with kindness, I must practice the deep path to its end. Gurus, please inspire me for this purpose. So I did want to share one quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I think it's from Rinpoche on this. I've been taking some quotes sometimes from Lam Rim Year, which I think all of you are familiar with. That's another resource that you can certainly use in your meditation on the Lam Rim. 365 meditations, one a day, to actually contemplate these various topics. And certainly feel free to supplement your meditation with those. But this is from Rinpoche, from another resource. I'm going to quote more from Lam Rimir going forward, but this was from the book he did, his collected teachings on the perfect human rebirth, which is also well worth obtaining if you have the desire to go deeper into this topic. There is no greater meaning in life than leading all sentient beings to peerless happiness. And the perfect human rebirth that we now have for this brief period gives us the ability to do just that. That is why we need to understand just how precious it is and determine never to waste a second of this rare and amazing opportunity. Okay. So I was thinking I might not fill the entire hour and a half with this topic, but it's fine in many ways because this is how I was teaching it when I taught it for Spain. Pretty much was one topic a session, pretty much, sometimes a little bit more, but it gives us something to think about over the next week and to meditate on these three main topics that we looked at. First, really getting that what we have is incredibly precious. And some of those words, even at the end, were really quite inspiring, right? To see, to be born at a time when not just the Buddha's teachings, but we were in the wake of Tsongkhapa's teachings, amazing teachings on the stages of the path and so on. To be born at a time when we do have Mahayana gurus that we have some connection with, to be born with an interest in the Dharma and to have all of the conditions to help us to practice and study. As Geshe Sherab was saying, we have access to the teachings like we've never had before, especially in our own language, in English. I don't have to learn Tibetan or Sanskrit to study the Buddha's teaching. I can just go to the books I have on my shelf here and pick one down and just start reading the Dharma without any problem. It's in my language. All these things we should think about in regard to this first topic, how we are endowed with unbelievable opportunity. Secondly, to really get that there's value in this, that we actually can use the situation we're in for incredible results, temporal and ultimate results, and certainly use it as much as we can every moment. And then thirdly, to really get how rare this is, to not kind of rest and say, well, oh yeah, this, I'm sure it was easy to get in the past and I'll get it again, no problem. It's a shoe-in. I find it kind of interesting. I have heard this quote from Lama Zopa Rinpoche that where he told somebody, I don't know who he told, that all of his students end up in favorable rebirths. Like I like go, well, maybe I don't have to work so hard. No. But I think we have to look at what does it mean to be Rinpoche's student? I mean, maybe that's a whole nother thing we're not thinking about when we hear a phrase like that coming from Rinpoche, all my students. Because I did even hear a story where somebody said that they were worried that maybe one of the students that they were praying for that of Rinpoche's that had passed away might end up in an unfortunate state. And Rinpoche said something like, none of my students ever end up in an unfortunate state. What does that mean? What does it mean to be one of Rinpoche's students? I think it means to be practicing the Dharma a hell of a lot more than perhaps I'm practicing the Dharma. So I don't want to rest on that either and think that, somehow the guru is going to save me from all this. This is this mentality that I think we have too much in the West anyway, right? That someone else is our savior. You know, maybe we're blessed by having done these actions that please the guru and in line with the guru's advice that create a sort of karma that helps us to ripen that into a good rebirth as opposed to the silly, stupid, non-virtuous things we've done in this life that could ripen into an unfortunate rebirth. But we shouldn't rest on that. We shouldn't take that for granted. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that Rinpoche made that claim, but I think we really have to examine what does it mean still to be a student of Rinpoche's, to really be a student of the Dharma, of the Lam Rim. That's what we're examining in this course, is really to make sure that these teachings are very tasty for us, that we actually meditate on them and practice them. And this is what our life is dedicated to. So we got about 5 minutes. If there are any questions, then there aren't, I'll certainly introduce what we're going to go into next week, or comments. Comments are welcome too, as you know. Anything that came up for people in tonight's class? Yeah, Ruth, please.
Well, I really want to thank you for this teaching. It's so good to refocus on what I take for granted sometimes, you
Mm.
know. I take my health, I take my life, I take my, but it's good to remember that it's not how everybody is, and it's maybe not how it's going to be in the future. And the time is, I mean, every moment, I mean, when you think about trying to focus your mind every single moment um, towards virtue or generosity or patience. Um, God, it's a good reminder. Thank you so much.
Sure. And I know it's not easy. I mean, we can hear these teachings and go, yeah, yeah, I'll sign up, count me in. But, to practice this way is a challenge. And we do have to remember, have that recollection every day that this is what we're here for, and not get sidetracked and what have you. It doesn't mean that we don't do anything else, but, sit in our room and meditate and read and what have you. We don't even eat. We don't even go out for a walk. We do everything with the best motivation. We're going to see this, as we go through the text as well, is that bodhicitta motivation assures that our actions will be most beneficial. That's why Rinpoche taught things like bodhicitta mindfulness, where you can even go to the bathroom, sit on the toilet, and make it virtuous by having virtuous thoughts as you engage in a very ordinary act that would normally have no real value to it. It's not really non-virtuous, but it would be kind of a mundane, just part of our day. And that's what we need to practice, is to bring our awareness of bodhicitta and these other principles, renunciation, emptiness, what have you, bring them into our daily activities as much as possible, which means we have to be familiar with them. We can't just say, oh, now I'm going to think about bodhicitta and just have it be very weak. We have to kind of bring that motivation into turning on lights and putting on our belt and all the various things that Rinpoche advised. Those that just wasn't Rinpoche. These actually do come from a sutra, the Buddha Mahayana Sutra, where he directs people to engage in all these mundane activities. You can find a little pamphlet. I think I mentioned it in Exploring the Path. Not Exploring the Path. Maybe it was. I don't remember. One of the Exploring Buddhism modules, that this is how we cultivate bodhicitta mindfulness, being aware of these motivations as we go about our day. And it's said that you can even transform, to some degree, non-virtue into virtue through having bodhicitta motivation. If you sit down at the end of the day, you're too tired to do any more meditation or study or whatever, and you just want to watch Netflix for an hour or something, or whatever, your streaming service, is your go-to thing, then do it with bodhicitta. Think, you know, I'm going to turn on the TV for a while, watch something at my computer screen, whatever, for a bit, to kind of de-stress from the day and whatever, and to try to give myself some space. But I'm doing this with bodhicitta. I'm doing this to benefit others. Replenishing my own energy, setting aside the task for the time being, and so that I can actually engage with more dedication and focus tomorrow. It's no problem. Venerable Rabina once, when I was talking about this whole thing, she said, "You do it with bodhicitta, or don't do it at all." But it's hard to hear that, but that's what we have to do. We have to really try to be mindful of these things. It takes a great degree of mindfulness. I don't think we talk about mindfulness enough in our tradition, because it really does mean keeping those things in our mind, making sure that our day proceeds with those virtuous thoughts that infuse everything that we do. That's how we take really good advantage of this human life that we have. Our cats can't do that, our dogs can't do that, other beings can't do that, but we've got the opportunity, by becoming familiar with these teachings, to try to bring them to mind more and more frequently through all the various things we do throughout our day. And yes, to engage in more dedicated practice and study and meditation and what have you. But the spaces in between are where most of our life is, probably, and those need to be tended to as well. So thank you, Ruth, for your comments. And I'm glad that this is a wonderful topic. Again, you could spend a lot more time on it, but we're going to try to focus like one topic each session and make sure that we do those fairly well. So we've got lots to meditate on. So you've got at least three main things to meditate on, with lots of little topics, juicy things inside each of those three parts. But try to keep arriving at that same conclusion that was mentioned at the end. I have something incredibly valuable, and I'd be a fool to waste it. Master Shantideva even has that one verse like, "This is no time for sleep, you fool." Kind of, he wags his finger at us a bit like, this is not the time for us just to hang back and coast through this life and enjoy all the wonderful things that human existence can give us. We'll see later again that those things are not that wonderful. So we'll kind of deflate that bubble later on. But for now, just to be sure that we use this life well. Any other comments? I hope you're being careful on the road there, Bill. Anyway, um, I'm glad you could tune in. Anyway, thank you all for joining tonight. Let's go ahead then and do a dedication prayer, a few of those. And again, next week we will go on to the next topic, which is the beginning of the first of the three levels of the stages of the path, the person of kind of the least capacity, but an important part of our stages of development. And of course, the topic, as I mentioned earlier tonight, is death and impermanence, that we all have to realize that this human life that we have and that we take for granted to some degree isn't going to last forever. So let's go to the prayers. We do the dedication prayers that we normally do. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. And then we'll recite the prayer for His Holiness's wishes to be fulfilled, as well as having thoughts for his good health and long lives. And as we recite that, think that we're also creating the causes for all gurus and all spiritual teachers, even in other traditions. If they're benefiting sentient beings in this world, we want them to stay in this world with good health and for a very long time. The wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then we're going to recite the prayers. It takes a little bit longer, but hang in there. We'll recite these 4 verses for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's swift return. We're just over a year since his passing, but we need to continue to create the causes for this, for his reincarnation to appear in this world, for it to be identified, for all the causes and conditions to continue, so that we can be under the guidance of precious Rinpoche once again. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings, through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the 3 jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And lastly, we'll dedicate for all those beings that we're holding in our hearts. And we have individuals that we know that are experiencing difficulties, suffering, what have you. But even parts of the world, such as in Gaza right now, and so many people suffering, as well as Ukraine and many other parts of the world, can direct this positive energy out to these beings, giving it away to them, freely, happily, willingly, so they experience freedom from their suffering and have all the causes that will bring them to true peace and happiness. And may all beings have these same results through what we have done here tonight. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to go through this text. I'm really enjoying it. It's kind of interesting compared to like when I taught it for Spain, even though I was teaching at a little bit slower pace because the translator needed to have time because he was doing simultaneous translation. So you can't just like go on like me. Somebody told me I'm almost as fast as Venerable Rabina, but I don't believe that. but I still do. This gives me more time to go into the topics a bit more than I was able to in Spain. Just seemed like we're not in Spain, but for the folks in Spain when I was teaching it. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to go through this text, and I hope it's of some benefit to all of you and to all beings. So thank you. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Next week, I will not be doing class because I'm going to be on a mini retreat. I will still be away the following week, but I'm going to teach anyway from where I'm going. I'm just house sitting for somebody on the other side of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains here. I've done that before and done retreat there, but I'll do about a week of more serious retreat and then kind of semi-retreat for the final few days. And so it's 2 weeks from today, which I guess is the 14th of May, is when we will resume. So you got lots of time to work with this perfect human rebirth. Uh, Contemplate it and generate great joy at your amazing opportunity. So, okay, everyone, be well. I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you,
Thank
thank you
so
so
Okay.
much.
And thank you, Colleen, for all your help. All right,
Send a
everyone.
reminder to you, so if you forget, then I'll tell you.
Okay. And I will send the copies of the slides and the other file on the 8 ripened qualities to you, Colleen. Okay, thanks so much, everyone. See you. Bye.